I don't need to agree with it, or I don't even need to be comfortable in it. I think quite the contrary.
Some people go their whole lives without ever facing the kind of heartbreak John Travolta has survived. But for this Hollywood legend, tragedy hasn't just come knocking once. It's kicked down the door more than once. Each time, it wore the same cruel disguise: cancer. That one word alone is enough to shake anyone to the core, but for John, it's been a repeating nightmare that tore through his world 3 separate times. 3 women, 3 battles, 3 heartbreaking goodbyes that could have crushed even the strongest soul. The man who made the world fall in love with his swagger in Saturday Night Fever and Grease has spent decades doing a different kind of dance, one with grief itself. Imagine being just 23, on the edge of superstardom and holding the woman you love as she takes her final breath in your arms. That's the kind of pain that never leaves. And just when he started to find his footing again, fate struck once more. His beloved mother passed away from the same disease that had already broken him once. Fast forward decades later, John rebuilds. He finds love again, builds a family, a life full of laughter and second chances. But cancer wasn't done with him yet. It came back one more time, cruel as ever, to take away his wife, the woman who stood beside him through it all. And as if that wasn't enough, the universe delivered yet another devastating blow: the sudden, tragic loss of his teenage son. It sounds like something out of a tragic Hollywood script, but this isn't fiction. This is John Travolta's reality. Most of the world knows him as Danny Zuko, the slick-haired heartthrob, or Vincent Vega, the cool-as-ice hitman from Pulp Fiction. We see the charisma, the signature grin, the timeless moves that defined an era. But behind those iconic roles stands a man who's faced more grief than most could imagine. The kind of heartbreak that doesn't just scar you, it reshapes who you are. It forces you to choose, crumble under the pain, or somehow keep moving forward. What's truly remarkable is how John's done it all with grace and quiet strength. No meltdowns, no scandals, no bitterness. Just a raw honesty about grief and healing. He's opened up in ways that have helped millions of fans face their own heartbreaks. Without trying to, he's become a guiding light for anyone who's ever wondered how to keep living when life keeps taking. And here's the twist that shocks everyone. After all these years, after every heartbreak and loss, John Travolta is finally finding happiness again. At 70 years old, he's embracing life with a new fire, cherishing time with his kids, laughing again, and showing the world what real resilience looks like. But one question still lingers. After losing so much and surviving what would destroy most, what's next for John Travolta? The answer might lie in where it all began. When he was just a kid from New Jersey, stepping into Hollywood for the first time, starring in The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, playing a boy fighting to live in a world that could hurt him. Maybe that's always been his story. Fighting to breathe through the pain and still choosing to shine. It was the kind of emotional TV movie that networks couldn't get enough of, a guaranteed tearjerker, and John Travolta was born to play the part. But nobody could have predicted the real-life heartbreak that would unfold behind the cameras.
Give me two, let's go.
Enter Diana Hyland, an elegant, established actress cast to play his mother. She was 41, he was just 23. And even though she was playing his mom on screen, something electric sparked between them that neither could deny. John was instantly captivated, totally swept off his feet from the very first day. Years later, he'd confessed that before Diana, he thought he knew love. But he hadn't. Not like this. The connection between them was instant, wild, almost magnetic. "We were like two maniacs," John said, remembering how they'd talk nonstop on set, sharing secrets, jokes, dreams, everything. Within weeks, that friendship exploded into something deeper, passionate, fearless, and consuming. For young John, it felt like destiny. He'd finally found someone who truly got him, someone who matched his fire and made him feel unstoppable. Diana brought this calm, mature energy that perfectly balanced his youthful rush of fame. And together they started dreaming big, a shared home, maybe even marriage. Life finally felt golden. But behind Diana's radiant smile, there was a truth she hadn't shared, one that would shatter everything. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer in 1975 and had already undergone a mastectomy. When she and John started dating, she genuinely believed she'd beaten it. She had hope, real hope, that the worst was over, and their love story was just beginning. While John was in New York filming Saturday Night Fever, the movie that would turn him into a global icon, he and Diana were already picking out houses, making plans to move in together. Marriage wasn't just talk. It was real, close, something they both wanted. Their future looked bright, full of laughter and promise, until suddenly, everything began to fall apart. Diana's health took a terrifying turn. The cancer had spread fast. The hopeful conversations with doctors became hushed ones. In what felt like seconds, their plans turned into prayers. Diana didn't even know she was dying until about 2 weeks before the end. Just 2 weeks to face the reality that the life she'd built in her mind was slipping away. John dropped everything, the fame, the filming, the dream, and flew straight back to Los Angeles. Nothing mattered anymore, except holding her hand through the storm. On March 27, 1977, tragedy struck. Diana Hyland died in John's arms. He later said he felt her last breath leave her body. Imagine that, 23 years old, on the verge of stardom, and already carrying a loss that deep. For the next 10 weeks, John was a shadow of himself. Broken, lost, barely able to process how life could give him something so beautiful, only to snatch it away so brutally. Friends say he cried nonstop, isolated himself, and tried to make sense of why love had come with such a cruel cost. But what John didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that this was just the opening act in cancer's long, haunting presence in his life. If losing Diana wasn't enough to destroy him, fate had another devastating chapter waiting in the wings, and it was only a matter of time before it struck again. Just 18 months after losing Diana, when John Travolta was still stumbling through grief and trying to find solid ground again, cancer came knocking once more. But this time, it didn't arrive through a lover or a co-star. It came through the one person who'd been his anchor since the very beginning, his mother, Helen Travolta. Helen wasn't just John's mom, she was his everything. The reason he ever dreamed of acting, the spark behind his talent, and the heartbeat of the Travolta family. Born Helen Cecilia Burke, she'd been a performer herself, a singer and actress who once toured with a radio group called the Sunshine Sisters. She even popped up in small acting roles, including a cameo as the lady in the paint store in Saturday Night Fever, her son's breakout film. How poetic is that? The same movie that turned John into a superstar immortalized his mom on screen right beside him. Helen was the true creative force in that household. The Travolta home was alive with music, drama, and big personalities, all of it fueled by her love for performance. Later, she traded the stage for a classroom, becoming a beloved high school drama and English teacher, passing on that same fiery passion to her students. But beyond all that, she was John's ultimate protector.
It's been this way for about 6 years now, so it all seems part of it. I don't really mind it anymore.
The person who shielded him from the world when fame, heartbreak, or pressure became too heavy. John was the baby of 6, sweet, soft-spoken, and deeply emotional. Friends from his childhood remember how gentle he was, how people naturally wanted to look out for him. and no one understood that better than Helen. She knew her son's heart was fragile, especially after losing Diana so painfully. So when she was diagnosed with breast cancer herself, she made a decision that speaks volumes about the kind of woman she was. She didn't tell him right away. Helen couldn't bear the thought of her son reliving that same agony. She'd watched him cry for Diana, watched him break, and she wanted to spare him as long as she could. Imagine that. A mother so selfless she hid her own suffering just to protect her child's heart. But eventually, she had to tell him, and when the truth came out, John's world shattered all over again. This time, he refused to just stand by helplessly. He became her rock. Every day he visited, sitting by her bedside, singing, joking, doing little performances just to make her smile. He'd dance, hum, act out scenes, anything to make her laugh. It was beautiful and tragic at the same time. The performer bringing joy to the very person who had taught him how to perform in the first place. But not even all that love, not even all that light could stop what was coming. On December 3rd, 1978, Helen Travolta passed away at 66 years old. Once again, cancer had taken another woman John adored. 2 losses, 2 women, the same disease, and all in less than 2 years. For John, it felt like the universe was testing him beyond reason. He described it later as a massive void, an emptiness no fame or success could ever fill. While the world cheered him as Hollywood's golden boy, he was quietly falling apart behind closed doors. And as if losing his mother and his great love wasn't already unbearable, life was about to hit him from yet another angle. Because even his skyrocketing career was starting to shake beneath the weight of his grief. By the early 80s, the disco craze that made John Travolta a global icon had burned out, and it took his career down with it. The dazzling lights of Saturday Night Fever had faded, and suddenly the critics who once praised him were calling him a flash in the pan, a one-hit wonder. Imagine that. Hollywood's golden boy, now being written off before he even turned 30. Personal tragedy still clung to him like a shadow, and the pressure of staying relevant in an industry that moves on fast only made things worse. Grief, fading fame, and doubt. It was a brutal storm, and John was right in the center of it. But somehow he didn't give up. The 1980s might have been cold to his career, but little by little, John started to heal inside. He took smaller roles, reconnected with himself, and waited for life to surprise him again. And it did. By 1988, while filming The Experts, John met Kelly Preston, and everything changed. Kelly was radiant, grounded, and full of warmth, exactly what John's battered heart needed. Their chemistry was instant, undeniable, and real. After years of heartbreak, he'd finally found someone who brought color back into his world. They couldn't stay apart. By 1991, they sealed their love with a secret midnight wedding in Paris. How cinematic is that? A man once defined by loss, finally finding his light again in the city of love. Together, John and Kelly built the kind of life that seemed picture perfect. They weren't just lovers. They were best friends, teammates, soulmates. In 1992, their joy doubled with the arrival of their first child, a beautiful baby boy named Jet. 2 years later, they welcomed their daughter Ella Blue, and by 2010, their youngest, Benjamin, completed their family. On the surface, John Travolta looked unstoppable. A loving husband, a devoted father, and an actor reborn after his explosive comeback in Pulp Fiction. But life once again had other plans, cruel ones. Jet Travolta, their eldest, had been born with autism and suffered from frequent seizures. The family kept it mostly private, doing everything they could to protect his dignity and peace away from the spotlight. Friends say John and Kelly's devotion to Jet was extraordinary. They never treated him like a burden, only as a blessing. John was always there, carrying him, traveling with him, watching over him. Their bond was unbreakable, the kind that words barely capture. In the Bahamas, where the family often vacationed, neighbors remember seeing John and Jet walking together constantly, laughing, holding hands, a father and son inseparable. John had survived losing 2 women he loved to cancer, but Jet was his heartbeat, his reason to keep smiling. He'd often say that being a dad was his greatest role. But then came that morning, the one that changed everything. January 2nd, 2009, the Travolta family was in the Bahamas, celebrating the new year at their home in the West End resort. Jet was 16 now, still struggling with his condition, but surrounded by love and care. They'd taken every precaution: 2 nannies, medical alarms, constant supervision. John thought he'd done everything humanly possible to keep his boy safe. But that morning, around 10 a.m., tragedy struck. One of the nannies rushed to wake John and Kelly, panic in her voice. Jet was on the bathroom floor, unresponsive. John sprinted downstairs, heart racing, and immediately began CPR, doing everything a desperate father could do. He fought. He refused to believe his son was gone, but it was too late. Jet had suffered a seizure, fallen, hit his head on the tub, and the impact was fatal. Just like that, the world stopped again. 16 years old, gone in an instant. Their attorney later said John was shattered beyond words, that the bond between him and Jet had been something you could feel just by watching them. He never imagined a life without his boy, and suddenly, that's exactly what he was facing. Another piece of his heart taken too soon. "To bury your son is the worst thing you can ever do," John Travolta once said. And that pain, that raw heartbreak, was something no words could ever truly capture. Losing Jet shattered him in a way the world had never seen. He was broken, empty, and numb. But even then, the nightmare wasn't over. In the cruelest twist imaginable, right after Jet's death, tragedy turned into scandal. An ambulance driver and a former Bahamian senator tried to extort $25 million from John and Kelly, threatening to leak private details about Jet's passing. Can you imagine? A family grieving their child and people trying to make money off their pain. It was disgusting. John was dragged into a high-profile court case, forced to relive the trauma publicly while testifying against those responsible. But as the stress mounted, he couldn't take it anymore. He dropped the case to protect what little peace his family had left. The damage was already done. The betrayal, the media frenzy, the reopening of wounds that hadn't even begun to heal. And then, a small miracle. In 2010, Kelly gave birth to their son, Benjamin. For the first time in years, light filled their home again. John later said that Benjamin had brought life back into the house. You could see it in his smile, cautious but real. The family began to heal, little by little, finding ways to celebrate Jet's memory without drowning in grief. John even started the Jet Travolta Foundation, dedicated to helping children with special needs, turning his pain into purpose. For a while, things seemed good, almost peaceful. But cancer, it wasn't done with John yet. It was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike one more time. In 2018, Kelly Preston received news that must have felt like déjà vu straight from a nightmare. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer, the same cruel disease that had taken both Diana Hyland and Helen Travolta decades earlier. For John, it had to feel like history repeating itself in the worst way possible. 3 women, 3 loves, the same merciless enemy. But Kelly was strong, so strong. Instead of turning her fight into a public story, she made a bold choice. She kept her battle private. No press statements, no emotional interviews, no social media updates begging for sympathy. She fought in silence, on her own terms, with quiet dignity. Behind closed doors, she was undergoing treatment at Houston's world-renowned MD Anderson Cancer Center, doing everything she could to survive. For 2 years, Kelly endured round after round of chemo, radiation, and experimental therapies. She worked when she felt strong enough, even starring alongside John in the 2018 movie Gotti, where she played Victoria Gotti, her last film role, though no one knew it then. After that, she faded from public view. No more red carpets, no more interviews, no more glossy magazine spreads. Her Instagram went quiet, her public appearances vanished. To most, it just seemed like the couple was enjoying family time away from fame. But those close to them knew something deeper was happening. A quiet war behind the scenes. John, having lived this nightmare twice before, could see the signs. He'd held Diana as she took her final breath. He'd sung to his mother as she faded away. And now he was watching the woman who had rebuilt his life fight the same battle. Still, he clung to hope. He believed, maybe this time will be different. Maybe science had advanced enough. Maybe love, faith, and strength could tip the odds. He became her rock, attending treatments, caring for their kids, shielding Kelly from unnecessary stress, doing everything possible to create moments of joy in between the hospital visits. But cancer doesn't care about hope or fairness. It doesn't care that you've already suffered enough. On July 12, 2020, Kelly Preston lost her battle. She was only 57 years old, taken far too soon. The news broke hearts around the world, but no one felt it deeper than John and their 2 children, Ella and Benjamin.
I understand. Gina, you move so fast. What does it feel like to move that fast?
Feels like flying.
Once again, the man who had given the world so much joy through his movies found himself surrounded by silence and sorrow. 3 times life had given him love. 3 times cancer had taken it away. And yet, through all that pain, John Travolta has continued to show grace, strength, and a kind of love that refuses to die, no matter how much the world takes from him. When Kelly Preston passed, John Travolta broke the news himself, not through a publicist or flashy press release, but with a heartfelt Instagram post that stopped everyone in their tracks. It was raw, beautiful, and utterly heartbreaking. He thanked the doctors and nurses at MD Anderson Cancer Center, the same people who had stood beside them through the storm. He thanked friends and loved ones who had shown kindness in their darkest moments. But most of all, he made a promise that he was stepping away from the spotlight to be there for his children, Ella and Benjamin, who had just lost their mother. The message was simple yet devastatingly powerful, the kind of honesty only a man who's lived through unimaginable grief could express. For John Travolta, this wasn't just another loss. It was the 3rd time breast cancer had stolen someone he loved. Diana Hyland, gone at 41, Helen Travolta, gone at 66, and now Kelly Preston, gone at just 57. 3 women, 3 different decades, the same merciless disease. Add to that the unbearable loss of Jet, and you have a man who's faced more heartbreak than most could survive. So how does someone like that keep going? How do you wake up every morning knowing that grief has followed you for 40 years? How do you still believe in love, in life, when fate has taken so much away? In the months after Kelly's death, John did something few celebrities have the courage to do. He opened up about grief with total honesty. In a series of quiet, emotional interviews, he shared what decades of loss had taught him, and his words hit home for millions who had loved and lost, too. John spoke about how grief is never one size fits all. Everyone's journey is different, he said. You can't rush it. You can't control it. You just have to let it happen. He explained that when Kelly died, he was overwhelmed, not just by his own sadness, but by everyone else's. People meant well, offering condolences, prayers, tears, but their grief started to drown out his own. "It's like two boats sinking together," he said. "You have to find your own way to stay afloat." That realization became his quiet mantra. Don't carry someone else's grief while you're trying to survive your own. Let people live their mourning. Don't complicate it with yours. Those words struck a nerve around the world, a rare, grounded truth about loss that came not from a therapist, but from a man who'd lived it over and over again. For a few years after Kelly's passing, John wasn't really living. He was surviving. Friends said he moved like someone underwater. Slow, heavy, just existing. He poured everything into his kids instead. He helped Ella launch her acting career, raised Benjamin with endless love, and made sure their home still felt like a place of warmth and safety. But in doing so, he forgot one person, himself. The spark that once defined him, that effortless charisma, had dimmed beneath layers of sadness. Then something started to change. Slowly, quietly, a shift began. By 2024, 4 years after Kelly's passing, people noticed something different about him. That light was coming back. John started traveling again, not for fame or business, but for life. He took Ella on a spontaneous trip to the Paris Olympics, treating her to a luxurious escape filled with 5-star hotels, Michelin-starred dinners, and strolls through the Louvre. For the first time in years, he looked genuinely happy, smiling, laughing, living in the moment. Friends said it was like seeing the old John again, the one who loved adventure, who thrived on connection, who radiated warmth wherever he went. He began making up for lost time, savoring life's pleasures, and rediscovering joy in the small things. But through it all, he's never let go of Kelly's memory. He posts tributes to her on her birthday, on Mother's Day, on anniversaries, keeping her spirit alive not through sadness, but through love. He's shown the world that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the people you've lost with you, gently, proudly, while still moving forward. After everything he's been through, John Travolta is finally showing what real resilience looks like. Not the kind built on denial or pretending everything's fine, but the kind forged through heartbreak, survival, and the decision to keep choosing life again and again. John Travolta has learned to face loss head-on, not by hiding from it, but by talking about it openly, even with his youngest son, Benjamin. When Ben once admitted he was scared his dad might die too, John didn't shy away from the hard conversation. Instead, he sat him down and gently explained what death really means, comforting him while being honest about the circle of life. It wasn't some scripted Hollywood talk. It was a father sharing hard-earned wisdom from years of heartbreak. He taught his son that grief is natural, that it's okay to feel pain, but that sadness doesn't have to own you. That kind of parenting doesn't come from books. It comes from living through loss and still finding a way to love again. John's been through fire and back, and now, at 70 years old, he's in what he calls a good place, emotionally, mentally, and physically. He's traveling the world, chasing sunsets, and checking off bucket list dreams one by one. He pilots his own planes, takes his kids on wild adventures, and fills his life with people who make him laugh until his sides hurt. But make no mistake, he's not running from grief anymore. He's learned to live with it. John said that Kelly will always be part of his heart, but that doesn't mean life has to stop. You can love what you've lost, he once explained, and still enjoy what's here. That's the real magic. Celebrating life while holding on to love. John's story isn't just about tragedy, though there's been plenty of it. It's about resilience, the kind that grows in silence when no one's watching. This is a man who's lost 3 women he adored to the same cruel disease, breast cancer, and then his teenage son to tragedy. He's faced the ugliness of public scandal, survived blackmail attempts during his lowest point, and still managed to rise again. Most people would have collapsed under even one of those blows, but not John. He bent, he broke, he fell apart, but he rebuilt himself. What makes his journey so powerful isn't just the survival, it's the honesty. In an industry obsessed with flawless smiles and perfect stories, John Travolta has been courageously real. He's admitted that grief is messy, unpredictable, and exhausting. He's shown that you can be famous, wealthy, adored, and still feel lost and broken sometimes. And that's what's made his story resonate so deeply. He's proven that it's okay to not be okay, that healing doesn't follow a straight line, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply wake up and try again tomorrow. His openness has become a source of comfort for millions, reminding people that they're not alone in their pain. John's shared his scars, not for pity, but to show others that you can rebuild your life, even after it's been shattered more than once. And now, at this stage of his life, it's beautiful to see him smiling again. To see him traveling with Ella and Benjamin, making new memories, laughing freely, and savoring the beauty the world still offers. Watching him rediscover joy after decades of heartbreak is something truly special. A reminder that the human spirit is tougher than we think. No, he hasn't forgotten Diana, or his mother Helen, or Kelly, or his beloved Jet. He carries them all with him. In every flight he takes, every laugh he shares, every moment of peace he finds. But instead of letting grief keep him grounded, John Travolta's chosen to fly through it, honoring their memories not with tears, but with life itself. By opening his heart and showing the world that love is stronger than loss, John Travolta has become living proof that life doesn't end when grief begins. It changes, it hurts, but it keeps moving. John once said that if he were to die tomorrow, the last thing he'd want is for the people he loves to be swallowed by sadness. That kind of wisdom doesn't come easy. It's earned through years of heartbreak, healing, and learning how to stand again after life knocks you down. His words are a gift, a message to all of us who've ever felt trapped in pain. They give permission to grieve fully but not forever, to remember with love but not obsession, to move forward without guilt or shame, because there is life after cancer, not just for those who survive the diagnosis, but for those of us who survive the loss. John Travolta's story is proof that the human spirit can bend without breaking, that it can find light even in the darkest corners of tragedy. Even when cancer comes back again and again, even when it feels like grief will never end, there's still hope. There's still laughter waiting somewhere ahead, still sunsets to see, still music to dance to if we're brave enough to reach for it. And if John, a man who's lost so much, can find his way back to living with joy, then maybe we all can too. So here's the real question. What can we learn from John's journey? How does his story change the way we think about grief, loss, and survival? Do you agree with his belief that mourning is deeply personal, that everyone must walk their own path through the pain? Have you or someone you love faced battles with cancer or devastating loss? How did you find the strength to keep going when it felt impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's turn this into a community conversation, a place where stories like John's remind us that we're not alone, that grief connects us all, and that healing is always possible, even when life feels broken beyond repair. And if John Travolta's story touched you, if his resilience inspired you, do me a favor. Hit that like, share, and subscribe button to America's Secret Channel. We're building something real here, a community that doesn't hide from pain, that honors real stories, real survival, and real strength. Because stories like this matter. They remind us that love doesn't die, that grief doesn't mean the end, and that no matter how heavy life gets, there's always a reason to keep going. Even after unspeakable loss, John Travolta is still dancing, still flying, still living, and honestly, that's the most beautiful ending we could ever ask for. Opening his heart and showing the world that love is stronger than loss, John Travolta has become living proof that life doesn't end when grief begins. It changes, it hurts, but it keeps moving. John once said that if he were to die tomorrow, the last thing he'd want is for the people he loves to be swallowed by sadness. That kind of wisdom doesn't come easy. It's earned through years of heartbreak, healing, and learning how to stand again after life knocks you down. His words are a gift, a message to all of us who've ever felt trapped in pain. They give permission to grieve fully but not forever, to remember with love but not obsession, to move forward without guilt or shame, because there is life after cancer, not just for those who survive the diagnosis, but for those of us who survive the loss. John Travolta's story is proof that the human spirit can bend without breaking, that it can find light even in the darkest corners of tragedy. Even when cancer comes back again and again, even when it feels like grief will never end, there's still hope. There's still laughter waiting somewhere ahead, still sunsets to see, still music to dance to if we're brave enough to reach for it. And if John, a man who's lost so much, can find his way back to living with joy, then maybe we all can too. So here's the real question. What can we learn from John's journey? How does his story change the way we think about grief, loss, and survival? Do you agree with his belief that mourning is deeply personal, that everyone must walk their own path through the pain? Have you or someone you love faced battles with cancer or devastating loss? How did you find the strength to keep going when it felt impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's turn this into a community conversation, a place where stories like John's remind us that we're not alone, that grief connects us all, and that healing is always possible, even when life feels broken beyond repair. And if John Travolta's story touched you, if his resilience inspired you, do me a favor. Hit that like, share, and subscribe button to America's Secret channel. We're building something real here, a community that doesn't hide from pain, that honors real stories, real survival, and real strength. Because stories like this matter. They remind us that love doesn't die, that grief doesn't mean the end, and that no matter how heavy life gets, there's always a reason to keep going. Even after unspeakable loss, John Travolta is still dancing, still flying, still living, and honestly, that's the most beautiful ending we could ever ask for. Still laughter waiting somewhere ahead, still sunsets to see, still music to dance to if we're brave enough to reach for it. And if John, a man who's lost so much, can find his way back to living with joy, then maybe we all can too. So here's the real question. What can we learn from John's journey? How does his story change the way we think about grief, loss, and survival? Do you agree with his belief that mourning is deeply personal, that everyone must walk their own path through the pain? Have you or someone you love faced battles with cancer or devastating loss? How did you find the strength to keep going when it felt impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's turn this into a community conversation, a place where stories like John's remind us that we're not alone, that grief connects us all, and that healing is always possible, even when life feels broken beyond repair. And if John Travolta's story touched you, if his resilience inspired you, do me a favor. Hit that like, share, and subscribe button to America's Secret channel. We're building something real here, a community that doesn't hide from pain, that honors real stories, real survival, and real strength. Because stories like this matter. They remind us that love doesn't die, that grief doesn't mean the end, and that no matter how heavy life gets, there's always a reason to keep going. Even after unspeakable loss, John Travolta is still dancing, still flying, still living, and honestly, that's the most beautiful ending we could ever ask for.